Hello, and welcome back to this last session of our fourth block on urban transport. In this session, we will talk about the big challenges and opportunities that arise for urban transport management. And these challenges and opportunities basically arise from three different angles. The first angle is the urban sprawl and the corresponding mobility needs that are created because of urban sprawl. The second type of big challenges arise from the environment, especially from climate change. And the third type of challenges and especially opportunities arise from the information and communication technologies that have been developed so rapidly over the past 20 years and have entered the whole transportation sector. Now, each of these challenges will be opportunities for managers to address them. And what we will briefly show here in this last session is how they will address this. Now, let's first talk about urban sprawl and the corresponding mobility needs. It is clear that mobility has become a driver of urban sprawl. Think about the development of the American cities after the Second World War with overall car use. The whole housing system has been developed outside of the city because of big roads and because of cars becoming available. And it is clear that mobility, the ability to move, has been driving the overall urban sprawl. On the other hand, the mobility needs have increased because of urban sprawl. Once that people live outside of the city, far from their workplaces, they have to move back into the city and by doing that, create all kinds of mobility problems, transportation problems, congestion problems. Now, a few examples here. I mean, in India, the number of motorized vehicles on city streets is growing at an annual rate of more than 20%. Imagine what that means. 20% more cars every year on the streets of the city. You can calculate by when the whole city will be clogged. In Mexico, for example, 2 new cars enter into circulation for every newborn child. Those are figures of 2011, but it hasn't improved ever since. Now, I think that the urban sprawl and the related growing mobility needs are the main challenge of urban transportation managers in the years to come. It is simply not possible to continue to develop mobility, especially by way of private cars, further into the future. What can they do to address this challenge? Now, the main challenge will be here to resist investing into further urban road infrastructure to put ever more cars onto the streets. Sooner or later, this will lead to traffic collapse. Now, what should they do instead? I mean, resisting is one thing. Doing something positive is something else. What do they have to do instead? I think the first big task is to do an integrated transport and housing planning. As we saw before, urban sprawl and mobility are closely related. It makes no sense to plan these things separately, to plan housing, building separately from planning transport, or to plan transport separately from how housing is planned. The second one is the second big task of urban public transport managers will be to actually increase the share of public transport in the overall mobility mix. And this has two aspects. One is to incentivize the use of public transport. We have seen that before. Public transport needs to become more efficient and more attractive, so that the inhabitants of a city are actually find it attractive and efficient to use it. The other aspect is, of course, to disincentivize the use of the car, to make it more difficult to use the car by by creating bus lanes, reducing the available space for cars, reducing the available space for parking, creating bicycle lanes, things like that. But this disincentivization, of course, needs to go hand in hand with the development of public transport opportunities. It makes no sense to disincentivize the use of the car and then not offer any alternative this will only make the transport more difficult for the users. Now, the second big challenge are the environmental challenges. And here, especially climate change, the emissions, but also the overall pollution reduction is just another driver, another pressure for urban transportation managers to develop public transport, to make it more attractive, to make it more efficient, to incentivize the use of public transport, to disincentivize the use of the private car. In addition to that, of course, there are also other things that urban transport managers need to do, namely to create public transport modes that are less polluting, that are more energy efficient, that use cleaner technologies, for example, by favoring electric vehicles, electric buses, or even electric taxis for that matter. And here, the second big aspect also is the creation of what we call soft mobility, to create dedicated bike lines, to create public bicycle offerings, to create dedicated pedestrian ways. These are not really alternatives to the urban mobility, but they are certainly useful complements to urban mobility. So often the big problem here is the last mile. You get to a metro or to a metro station, but your house is still 500 meters away, or your office is still 500 meters away, and an easily accessible bicycle will make all the difference and allow you to have an integrated mobility chain where soft mobility is complementing the traditional public transport modes. The third big challenge that urban transport managers have to face are the ICTs. But the ICTs are actually really an opportunity for them. The ICTs have the unique potential to address the two big challenges that transport managers have to face, namely discouraging the car use. And the ICTs, how can they do that? They can do that by creating mobility pricing schemes, which can incentivize better mobility behavior. For example, you pay for congestion pricing. For congestion, you pay for entering into the city. You pay at certain peak hours more than you pay at low peak hours. And the way the ICTs technologically allow for pricing the mobility of the people who move around in the city. And then this money can be used to generate the necessary investments to develop or to subsidize public transport in the city. The second thing that the ICTs can do is to make public transport more attractive. Clearly, the ICTs can improve the intermodality, that is the moving from one transport mode to the other. They can do that by having a more integrated planning, either for the users, which can now plan their travels across the different modes smoothly. Sometimes The app will also give you an indication of alternative in case that there is a problem with the train or in case there is congestion. But they also allow for better integrated planning of the city, for example, across jurisdiction, across different jurisdictions, because thanks to the data that you now have generated, you can actually plan the whole mobility much better. Secondly, it improves intermodality because the ICT improve integrated ticketing. And so you can now buy a ticket that crosses all the transport mode, or actually get rid of the ticket altogether because you are billed on your credit card or some other urban integrated ticket, which allows you to use all the transport modes. And this ticketing you actually can combine back with what I said before with mobility pricing. And then the ICTs can create new services such as car sharing services, bicycle sharing services, ride sharing services. That is, those are services that complement the traditional public transport modes, but allow the users to move much more easily across the city. So in this last session, we have now seen the big challenges and what the big challenges of urban transport and what the urban transport managers can and should do to respond to these challenges. We have seen that the ICTs is a big opportunity in doing precisely that. We will now say a few words to conclude the overall course. Stay tuned.